Thank you everyone again for joining us today. This is part 2 of our professional development series. And this is a quick agenda that we put together. We're going to start off with an introduction of our 4 distinguished panelists today. We're going to keep it short and then launch right into the panel discussion, which centers around interviewing, which is the main topic today. And then at 7, we'll start, inviting questions from you, and feel free to drop it in the chat or just unmute and say it out loud. It's going to be, we're going to keep it as casual as we can, and then we'll try to end at 7:30. Great. So welcome again.
So these are our 4 panelists today. So we're gonna have our brief session in the order of the pictures. So Whitni, please share a little bit about yourself and just take it from there.
Hi everyone, I'm Whitni. I'm recently licensed architect. I'm currently a project architect at Moody, Nolan. I got my bachelor's at Clemson University in South Carolina, and then I did the Master's of Architecture and Urban Design dual degree program at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. I'm also part of BosNOMA, which is how I heard about this panel, and I am the co-chair for the Communications Committee. That's about it. I guess I could say I have interview experience from doing multiple career fairs and going through the entire process, coming out of grad school and looking for a job.
Thanks, Whitni. Ben.
Hi, Ben Carlson, Director of Urban Design with CHPlanning for about 6 months. CHPlanning is a planning firm, Black woman-owned firm focused on equity in transportation and land use and environmental planning. And historically, it's been based more in Philadelphia and Washington, but I'm sort of the Boston office. I had been with Goody Clancy for 23 years before that, first as an architect, and then about 5 to 7 years into my time there, transitioned into planning and urban design, which I've done ever since, and worked some on the BSA Urban Design Committee. I've had the opportunity to interview a bunch of people and think about hiring for about 10 years, both for formal job openings, but also more informal conversations as well. So have some perspective on that from the interviewer side of the table. And then, for myself, I was also pursuing a job transition in the last couple of years. So said about that myself. So initially studied architecture at Yale and then UC Berkeley. And I look forward to people's questions and in our discussion tonight.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Then we have Patricia.
Yes, my name is Patricia Sakata. I'm with CBT, and in fact, I work with Sae and Eunice, so it's nice to be a little after work, hanging out with my friends here from CBT. I'm originally from Brazil. I have been at CBT for 9 years, so it adds up really quickly. I went to Washington University in St. Louis and graduated with a Bachelor of Arts with a major in architecture. Rather rigorous program, very liberal arts. So I was very fortunate to have the education of just really exploring a lot of different paths, but architecture has always been my passion. So I'm fortunate to have a job in something that I'm really love. Eventually went to pursue my master in architecture at the GST here in Cambridge. But there's been a little bit of bouncing around, if you will, in the world for my work, in that I worked in Spain. I did a little bit of work in Brazil, where I'm from. Got to work in St. Louis, New York, but now being in Boston, I also worked at a couple of companies here. So nice to have Boston as my hometown as well. And we never forget what it's like to look for a job. So we're here to answer questions. We'll be very candid, I'm sure. and have had quite a bit of experience. I've been in many interviews with Sae as well before, so I look forward to getting his perspective too. Probably for 6-7 years or so, we've been interviewing full-time summer interns, very similar to Ben, actually. We always welcome somebody just giving us a call and just having a better understanding of what we do day to day, because we're also trying to figure that out ourselves. So I'm really glad to be here, and thank you for having us. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Patricia. And finally, we have Sae.
Hi, I'm Sae Kim, and I was born in Korea. Moved to the States when I was around, about 10 years old. But my undergrad was architecture at Rhode Island School of Design. And then I worked in New York for a couple of years at a couple of very small firms. And then I went off to grad school. And then for grad school for MAUD, Masters of Architecture and Urban Design. And then I took a year off in the middle to work in Switzerland for Herzog and de Meuron. And then after working there for a year, I came back to the GST to finish my master's degree. And then after I graduated, I joined CBT right after. So I've been with CBT for about 10 years, associate principal here, as well as a senior designer. As you can kind of imagine, undergraduate architecture, master's in urban design. I sort of straddle between the two scales and work on both types of projects. It's one of the things that I really wanted to do to make sure that I get to touch on both types of projects. And I was fortunate enough to join a firm that actually, can accommodate those sort of a condition. Last year, I started a YouTube channel called The New Architect, because I'm in New York actually. And then with the newborn, things got a little busy. So I've been kind of hands off for several months now, but hoping maybe I can get back on it soon after. So, but anyway, look forward to hearing your questions and addressing any kind of topics that you guys want to talk about.
Thank you so much, Sae. So after the discussion, we prepared several questions to each panelist, and as Sae and Ben briefly talked about, we also want to touch a little bit on working on architecture and urban design, but before going into more of the specific.
Oh, Eunice, you froze.
Oh no. She said she's been having some internet issues. All right, I guess we can just give her a minute. Right, I guess
this is the new norm, right? The default. We always expect some sort of a technical difficulty, one form or the other.
Absolutely. Well, we'll give her some time and we can launch right ahead. So we're going to keep the first set of questions a little general, and we can bounce it off of the different panelists, and then we'll move on to more specific questions that are geared towards you. So first off, I'll start with Whitni. What inspires you in your work, and what makes you care most about its quality and impact? And you can just pass the popcorn around.
Okay. What inspires me the most about my work, this actually just happened recently, just talking to someone randomly on the train and hearing how much they enjoyed the last project I worked on and how much it changed just like their everyday experience going to and from work. And then what was the second part of the question? Sorry.
What makes you care most about its quality and impact that you create?
Just because of where I come from, a very small town, and there's not much quality in the buildings that are there. So I've always kind of been along the lines of let's create something that's nice and decent for people to work in, live in, see, be around, because I feel like that changes your experience. And I'll pass it to Patricia.
I like it. I wasn't expecting the popcorn, but I'll do with it the best I can. The type of work that I do now, it's currently focusing on the contract administration. So this is really the final stage of delivering the building to our clients and users. And I had previously done a lot of the early work, more of the schematic design. So what inspires me is the elasticity that we can have as an architect. We can say that there is design in everything that we do of putting puzzles together, but my inspiration is actually just, you know, opening something new and thinking, oh, wow, I never thought of it that way. And the experts with whom we can collaborate, I work very closely with our contractor, with structural engineers. Our plumbing engineer is one of my favorite collaborators. You know, may not think that, but so it's actually just opening something and just being bewildered by how much I don't yet know, and then realizing I've seen that before. I know where to find the answers. So it's the inquisitive, the investigation part of it that is really inspiring to me. Say you get the popcorn now.
I don't think we have to have the
Well,
popcorn that's handed over to everyone, but
it's your popcorn now.
Okay, since I got it, I'll respond. I get inspired by pushing the creative boundaries. So, you know, I don't like to sort of associate myself as just an urban designer or an architect. I would like to, I mean, of course, when I introduce myself, just for the ease of people to understand what I do, I just say architect. But when I really look inside, I would like to consider myself as more of a creative individual. So what that means is that in all typologies and all phases of projects that I work on, I really try to find sort of a new and different ways of pushing the creative boundary, whether that be in design or whether that be in programming. It could be at details. And, you know, a lot of it comes with sort of really putting the story together so that you're convincing your audience. And that's sometimes the client, and it's sometimes the community. Sometimes your consultants, right? And really being able to make a compelling sort of a argument of why this sort of unheard of method or unheard of detail would benefit the project in certain ways is something that I actually find joy in. So I would say that that's part of what inspires me a lot. And I'll skip the second question, and then I'll pass the popcorn back to our moderator.
Thank you, Sae, and everyone. Sorry, I had a little bit of technical difficulties. So from here, we're gonna go into a little bit more into the interviewing.
We still have Ben. Sorry,
Oh,
Ben.
sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I'll do after Ben.
No problem. In terms of inspiration, I guess, I mean, I've always just liked making a positive impact on communities. And, you know, originally I was really thinking of that through architecture. And then I realized there's a bigger scale of impact in towns. And I usually, you know, really focus on walkable places, not like the more exurban town I grew up in, but places where people can gather. And so it's you know, helping communities really make a difference, achieve changes that they want to do, or deal with changes that are coming at them, and realizing that that's something that needs to empower everybody to do. You know, giving people the tools, whether it's zoning or how they can use a sidewalk, you know, tools that they can use to make a difference in their everyday lives and in what happens in their community. And so I enjoy working with my colleagues at work and consultants, as well as communities, to make that happen.
Thank you. Okay, is everyone is everything set? So we are gonna go to the second question that is a bit more about the interview. So what one question would you ask candidates that will make or break the interview in your mind?
I guess
maybe this time Ben can go first for this question.
Fair enough. Let's see. I guess the question would be, I mean, it would almost be that same question. It's, you know, what inspires you in your work, or, you know, what's the type of project you would most like to work on? Because when I'm talking to someone who's, you know, a potential colleague, future colleague, I want to really understand what passion they bring to their work, what's going to motivate them to think independently, and really, seek quality in their work and real impact of their work. And so I want to hear that from somebody. If they have fairly generic answers, I probably won't be that interested. If they tell me more about, what is driving them, that is key. And I think that matters more than any particular technical skills you may have. We can all learn skills over time, but it's more the why. Why are you interested in architecture or whatever kind of design you're pursuing? Should I hand it off to, okay, so the next victim, I'll hand it off to Patricia.
Like I'm always the second one getting the popcorn, that's fine. This is going to sound a little self-centered, but the question that will make it or break it is, are they prepared? Have they looked at the work that we do? This is as much, I look the way that the interview goes, that it's as much of an interview for us to consider a candidate as it is for them to consider us. So it's going to sound a little creepy maybe, but look at LinkedIn if you know who's going to interview you. Look at Instagram, do your research. I think a resume portfolio will get you an interview will get you the job. So, I'm really glad that we're having the discussion, because sometimes when you're looking for a job, you think, am I too stressed about this? Am I overthinking it? You actually are thinking it just right if you're focusing on how do I interview, because you want to, first of all, know where the office is. You want to know what the culture is. You want to know if there are alumni from your previous school that has gone there. Just ask around, do the legwork. And I know it sounds a little intense, but you give yourself a chance. And the thing is, you have control over it. Look at the projects, and then really be very, I think, bespoke, almost tailor your interview each time that you meet somebody new. So ask them questions of projects that you've done before, or they've done before, some things that you may have found that you think you could fit into the culture, to the endeavor that they're looking for. So it will make it or break it if they don't have enough knowledge, if they haven't taken the time to look through what we do and what we're about. It's good to match to have a synergy where the candidate and those interviewing really, just help us to be able to have a productive conversation, so we can not only assign each to the right department or, just continue to the discussion. So be knowledgeable of, the people with whom you're interviewing.
Thank you, Patricia.
Eunice, you can give the popcorn to the next one.
Okay, I'm gonna give my popcorn to Sae this time.
Right. Thanks. Slightly different perspective from Patricia, I guess. I guess for me, there isn't a single question that's gonna break it or make it, right? It's hard to say that this one question is gonna be sort of the game changer. I think it's, at the end of the day, it just comes down to the entirety of the interview process. And I would say that, but one of the qualities that I think is important, at least for me, is how transparent and honest you are, so no bullshit, basically. And one of the questions that I like asking is, what are your strengths, which is something that everybody can answer, but follow up to that is, what are your weaknesses? And this is where the question of no bullshit sort of, that sort of trait really plays a role, because for one, it's important for you to know where you excel and what you're good at, but I think it's just as important for you to know where you fall short, and to understand how you are planning on sort of making up for those shortfalls in many instances. A similar question that I like also asking is, what is one project that, let's say, CBT did that you really don't like, and why, right? It's easy to get questions like, oh, what is your favorite project, or why did you apply to CBT? But to ask, talk about the project that we did that you don't like, And these questions are questions that I have received in the past. And I think when you ask these kind of questions, these are oftentimes these are like curveballs, right? But I think that's when you really get sort of a really honest answers, or when you know that they're sort of, really just trying to give you a textbook answer. But with these curveball questions, it's really hard to give a textbook answers because it's a very tricky question. But sometimes I like to hear that, oh, actually, my weaknesses are XYZ. But and then maybe you can elaborate on that by talking about how you can also use those weaknesses as potentially being a strength in the future. So there are different ways to sort of frame the answer. But for me, long story short, it's the entire process, and whether I can really see this person being honest and truthful and transparent about their approach, I think is important for me. I'll hand it off to Whitni.
An important question I think I like to know the answer to is how you want to grow with our firm, or like, where do you see yourself? What's your plan? What's your goal? Because a big thing for us is getting you to that point, figuring out what you need in order to do that. And so if you don't really have an answer for that, I wouldn't say it's concerning, but it's kind of like you should be thinking of those things, especially when you're interviewing with a firm that you're passionate about or you're really interested in. You need to know like what they do, what work they're doing, and how that can help you. So you don't really want to go somewhere where it's not going to benefit you in your career. So that's my question.
Great. Well, thank you all. That was really diverse, all your perspectives. And I know it's a very common mistake that people make when they apply, to like 100 firms all at once without even thinking about the specifics. So these are really, really important points. So our next topic, we right now we're in this hybrid kind of virtual world, but a lot of firms are now requiring in-person interviews. And so what are your thoughts on that? If firms ask you to come in person and want to meet you versus if they offer you the option of taking it from home? And we can start off with Sae.
I think the preference always is in person. I think we can all agree that meeting somebody face to face is always better than this kind of a virtual. But given the circumstances, I think there are definitely circumstances when that is not possible, right? And in those cases, I think it's important for firms to be able to accommodate those circumstances. I think it's a really important part of our profession moving forward, that this idea of flexibility and being able to accommodate different sort of needs and circumstances, I think is going to be a really sort of a important factor. And I think that CBT definitely tries to also sort of be that. The major difference, and I think some of the things we experience today is when we run into these technical difficulties and when we go through the virtual sort of interviews, I think that's when sort of this unknown factor sort of could play a role in making the interviewee really nervous, right? Because for some reason, the voice isn't working. They're trying to share their screen, but it's not it's not showing for some reason, or whatever other kind of technical difficulties there might be. If you're meeting in person, it as long as once you get there, it's rare that those kind of situations would happen, and it really sucks to see, and it's heartbreaking to see somebody sort of lose their rhythm because of these technical difficulties. But I think everybody should just be aware that it's very common. I mean, we went through it today, and I think more and more firms, if they're not already, they should be understanding of these situations. And you shouldn't take it as such a big deal when these kind of things happen. You just simply say, having technical difficulties, can I re-log back in, or can I restart my computer? and you just, take it very calmly and step by step. So I think those are probably more of a pragmatic, but, important difference. And I think, if you're a candidate, applying to firms, when you run into those circumstances, just don't panic and just, keep calm. All right, I'll hand it off to Ben.
Sure. Yeah, in-person interviews are, I think always really helpful. But reality is, now and even before the pandemic, plenty of virtual interviews. I interviewed candidates from Peru who I actually hired, and San Francisco a few years ago. It's a great way to connect with people who can't be there in person. I would say, as Sae said, on the one hand, yes, be on top of your screen sharing tools and your connection tools. Don't do what I do and connected on the wrong link tonight. But at the same time, don't stress about it, because everyone's making mistakes, and so that's not a big deal. What I would say though is, I'm sure you'll be sharing some graphic content. You might be sharing portfolio. You might be sharing, website images of work you've done. Just make sure that is well organized and easy to understand. Practice using a highlighter in real time on a PDF, or making your pointer bigger so you can really point to things that you want people to see. So it's as if you were there in person pointing to things on a page. Just make that really clear, and that's important to an interview, and it's also an important presentation skill that we're using all the time in meetings with clients or meetings with the public also. So make sure your visuals are reading, make sure they're big enough, and then also remember to take them down, because we want to have the FaceTime, at least the virtual FaceTime, as much as possible too. Okay, Whitney.
So I did both. I was interviewing out of grad school a year before the pandemic happened. I had both virtual and in-person interviews. So my advice for both is just to make sure your personality shines through during both. It's a lot harder when you're doing it virtually, but it makes a difference if you're yourself, you're relaxed, you're personable, if you're bubbly like I am, you're smiling, you laugh at their jokes, even if they're not the funniest, but you still laugh. Do what you have to do virtually and in person to get that second interview. And I will also say, if there is a chance to get a second interview and your first interview was virtual, ask always if it can be in person the second interview, because that will make a difference. It's what made me decide to come to Boston instead of going to Pittsburgh, was coming and visiting and seeing, everyone, meeting them in person, because in-person personalities are definitely different than virtually, especially if you're the interviewer and you have interviews back to back to back. Once you meet that person in person, they're going to be a little bit more personable. So that's my advice. And then Patricia.
Thanks, Whitney. I love Ben and Whitney's answer, so I'm going to use that for myself in the future. And frankly, I think it's really cozy for the four of us to say, in this time of pandemic, I've had a job throughout it. I've been very fortunate. I'm not looking for a job currently, but I can sincerely appreciate how difficult it may be. If there's a job that you really want and people with whom you want to collaborate, if they say this is what we're doing, to be in a position where you have to, perhaps risk not getting the job that you really want. It's a personal decision ultimately. For sure, personal, having that interaction is ideal. But, I think just having a plan B, maybe even alphanumerically, if I can have a PDF on a desktop, or if it goes wrong, send it to, HR, they should have it already. But just, and then recognize, like we've been talking about, there are technical issues for sure. A lot of times it's how you handle with the situation or the situation itself. And we should be coming out of all of this and into the new, all the phases that we're going through with great compassion. And if, if you're not met with that kind of humanity, then, maybe that wasn't a good match. And, that's not to console yourself that you didn't get the job, but, one thing that I actually would suggest too is if you somehow have issues and there's only a 30-minute slot, pick one favorite thing, one project, one thing about yourself. Like Whitney's saying, just let your personality shine. So, maybe plan C is if I only have 5 minutes, what do I want to get out of it? So you do make that impression and you feel proud about yourself.
Those are really all great answers. Thank you so much. So next, we are gonna go to the question more about skills. So could you just give what kind of soft skills and software skills are most important nowadays? And I'm going to point to Whitney first this time.
Okay. Soft skills, I would say being a good team member. That's a lot harder than people understand. And a lot of people don't come knowing how to be a good team member. Software skills, of course, Revit, it makes a difference, especially when you're working on like a larger team. If your skills aren't up to par, then it's going to be hard for the team to keep up with the work. So for me, definitely Revit and definitely being a good team member. And I'll pass it to Sae.
Thanks, Whitney. It really depends who you're talking to, but for me, I guess when I'm interviewing somebody, the baseline is that you can check off the job description boxes, which, if you're applying for, let's say, a project architect or a designer, right? The expectation is that you would be a good project architect or a good designer, right? So that's one. Two is being a good communicator, right? To make sure that, doing good at what you do is one thing, but being able to communicate is a different thing, right? And then the third is the obviously being personable, right? Personality-wise, these are the baseline. So if anybody is not checking off any one of these three boxes, then I would not consider extending an offer to that person. But for me, what's important is what is this additional thing that you can bring to the table other than the three basics, right? So usually it could be, is it a software? Are you interested or are you well versed in coding, Grasshopper, Python? Or it could be, are you passionate about community engagement? You're active in sort of a lot of the community groups and get-togethers, perhaps, or nonprofit organizations. It could also be you're passionate about sustainability, right? It could be many things, but I think one of the things that really draws me towards a candidate is when somebody can check off all the boxes and be a good player and can communicate well, which means that this person can get the job done. But on top of that, can I see this person sort of becoming a leader in the office to be able to push the boundaries, right? And it could be a technical skill as like, this person is like really good at, let's say a Revit workflow and sort of, integrating Revit with a Rhino, for example, right? So it could be many things, but this plus something else that this person can bring to the table is something that I always look for. Patricia?
Yeah, it's very much of what Sae was just saying there too. In what an architect is, it's no longer conventional, I don't think. I think it's, we have a colleague at CBT, they were telling me that, at one point she was just, they're very curious about, what's really marketing in architecture. I think that's a great question. It's not a checkbox per se. I think it's the intellectual curiosity. And so as far as soft skills, I think it's actually really going back to even to what Whitney said, really, it's, we're all trying to figure ourselves out. I'm not looking for somebody who has a brand per se. I also am trying to figure out what I'm best at or I'm not very good at yet. But I think the soft skill, I think, is this curiosity, well, I know this thing, but maybe I can try to figure something else out. So it's Sure, if you want to go on an interview, you want to come in as an expert, but I think just having the vulnerability of saying, you know, actually, I'm a multitasker. You don't have to tell me that. But I think on the interview, if you go through, well, I've done this and that, let me connect the dots and think, okay, well, this is a very driven person, or this is a person who, you know, is really good and, you know, maybe be a bit of an introvert, but I think it's okay to communicate in different ways. So it's really this agility of, you know, how do you express this uniqueness that you have? And I think that just makes everything better. You know, there's no finite, you know, soft skill. And then I think as far as, you know, software, I know that that's something that we have to ask, you know, candidates. I don't think that not knowing Revit should ever deter somebody from having, you know, the experience. I recognize that it's really important these days, but you know, sometimes when I'm in an interview, not the case anymore, but I used to actually print out, you know, the resume, and I would like circle things, just, you know, sometimes you help out a candidate, like, so they can see, like, I see things that are really good about you. And sometimes it's a skill set, but it doesn't have to be. At least in the way, again, this is, you know, personal opinions that we have. I never think that that should deter. You can learn Revit online, you know, I mean, maybe not exclusively for free, but I think the curiosity, I think you can get it, you know. Who hasn't had the popcorn yet? Everybody. Ben, you're it.
Yes, I'll be quick. The you know, technical skills, yeah, as everyone says, it may vary by the position, but I would say if there's a particular type of software that's requested, you know, really try to provide a product that demonstrates your understanding of it and the power of that tool, or how to communicate through that tool. So if the position is looking for renderings or diagrams, or three-dimensional, you know, modeling, just, you know, a good example. You don't have to be the world expert in that software, but you just need to demonstrate that you really know what it's doing. In terms of soft skills, I would just underscore what was said about communications, and that goes in multiple forms. It's certainly visuals that are important in our fields of you know, whatever types, floor plan, diagram, but it's also written, and you know, while you need to be presenting lots of text to read, you know, just the labeling of diagrams or images makes a big difference. Demonstrating that you can compose, whether it's a you know, project design sheet or a report, that you can compose images and words, tables, have them work together with the right kinds of headings to tell a story is really important. And then the verbal presentation, and that includes asking questions. I would suggest, you know, going to the interview with some questions for the interviewers so that you can really have a dialogue. It's not just about sort of presenting yourself as a monologue, but it's about engaging in a discussion.
I'm going to piggyback on what Ben just said. Sorry, I know I already responded, but I want to emphasize the fact that communication and speaking English well are two different things. I see that a lot of the people on this call, you know, English may not be the mother tongue, but communication can happen even if you don't speak English fluently. So that could be, you know, using simple words, but you can still communicate clearly by just using very basic, simple words, complemented by, you know, graphics and other sort of, you know, sometimes gestures and expressions, right? I think this is one part that I think a lot of people sort of get confused by. They try to use like really difficult or hard, you know, words that they heard, you know, in their academic years, and they try to, you know, sound smart. But you don't have to do that to communicate effectively. It could be done by using simple words. And I think, you know, what Ben was saying about the communication and the visual graphics, I think is something that is to be highlighted.
Absolutely. Thank you. Great points. I think especially when even if you don't have a specific technical skill, the firm should be willing to train you for that, and that's a good sign of a firm that wants you to grow. Yeah, thank you all. That was really enlightening. And we have a slightly unconventional question. So regarding, we all have heard about the Great Resignation and, people pursuing other interests. What are your thoughts about career breaks and how we can possibly normalize them with time, and how that's, how that can be something that you wouldn't be asked about if you put that in your resume? And thanks, Patricia, for that question. By the way, that was really great. And I guess we can start off with you, Patricia.
Yeah, totally. I would say, yeah, so I took some time off to help my family. And then I took some time off to spend all the money that I have traveling in Europe for the first time, because I had never been there before in my mid-20s. And I have found actually, and maybe this is just me, anytime I have an interview, and I think even last year I know I was scheduled for maybe like 100 interviews or something, or maybe felt like that. I will print every resume, and I'm not looking for holes, but I'm just trying to like get inside, like what's this person, what could be. So I did take the time. I always do that 2 days before the interview. And I expect, and I'm not saying that everybody does that either, but I have found so many people that once, a gap comes up, they have such beautiful stories. I don't, if you're not working like crazy, don't worry, like have confidence, sometimes if there's struggles, that's okay, but also just come, ready. I mean, I got to say like, well, I worked in Barcelona, then I traveled. But then when I talked about, my mom, that was, I didn't talk about that in every interview, but that came up. And I was proud to say I'm somebody who took care of her mom, you know. And I think there was a question about the career path. It's just a matter of, you're not starting from scratch. That's not a whole like, and especially these days, if you've been furloughed, if you've been let go, if you had to take care of a parent or a child or yourself, mentally health, mental health is health. If you couldn't, whatever impediments you may have had to produce work, it may be a time of reckoning, so then you can have that candid conversation. I think Sae talked about transparency, and I think I would go with that. I would go with be, first of all, mindful, so then you don't really leave the interview and you feel super exposed, like, oh my gosh, they know everything about me. It just pick your points and focus on your strengths. Don't try to, in my opinion, move away from, oh, I was out for 5 years doing something, don't worry about it. But, be intentional of what you say. And that comes through so beautifully that you find out about the person, what motivates them, why they want the job so much, because we want to be able to provide opportunities. Yeah, that's what I would say. I find a lot of those times, I had somebody say, she said, I ended up being a hostess at Olive Garden, and the things that she talked about and how she engages with clients in the service industry are fascinating. So for anything, you know, and you have much more to offer perhaps than you know. So when you have those times that you're just, a bit suspended in your life, good for you, because you're looking for a job. So that's the part that we remember. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Patricia. Sae?
I think what Patricia said, I totally agree with. The transparency I had mentioned earlier. I love being in an interview or in the same room with Patricia, because she's so positive and everything is beautiful and pretty. I'm gonna give a slightly different perspective because I'm always the bad cop in my office. Along the same lines, I think it's important as it relates to transparency that you don't try to pretend you are when you're not, to be someone that you're not, for example, right? So, or you don't pretend that you did something that you didn't do. And what I mean by that is sometimes I do see people writing about, let's say, their part-time job that they worked for, like, 10 hours a week. But in their resume, they write it as if it was a full-time job for the duration of like 2 years, for example, right? And I think when I see those kind of things, and it tells me a little bit about how honest you are, or whether how dishonest you are. And I think that Patricia's point, it's good to talk about when you do have gaps, what you did during those gaps, right? It's bad if you try to, let's say, Patricia traveled in Europe for a year. And then let's say the previous year she worked, for 3 years, right? If she sells herself as somebody who has, let's say, 4 years of experience, right? Then I think that's bad. But I think if she says that, okay, I have 3 years of experience, I took a gap year and I travel, or I took care of my family, right? That's great, right? And then now I want to get back into the profession, and let's talk about it, right? I think that is perfectly fine. But when you try to sort of disguise some part of your career or your experience with something that it really isn't, I think that's when things really start to fall apart for me, because I know that there's a little bit of the transparency isn't there, right? So I would just make sure that you be authentic, and you be transparent. Whitney?
So I cannot speak to career breaks personally. I've been fortunate enough to go straight through school into a job at a firm that I really enjoy. But I can speak a little to how do you decide on a new career path. I'd say figure out what interests you and then find a job that fits that, because there's literally a job out there for everything, for every person's interest. And then the next question that we had that kind of goes off of that, if you don't want to be pigeonholed into a specific type of project, which I also had this issue with when interviewing, be very transparent, like Sae was saying, about what your interests are and what you want to do, because if they don't hear you say that in the interview, then they're not going to necessarily hear it later on either. So be very transparent about where you want to be, what you want to work on. If you don't have those skills, then I'd say tell them at the beginning, like, yes, I understand I haven't worked in these project types, but this is what I have worked on, and this is how I feel like these skills can translate to these project types. And I think that would be very beneficial for you. Ben.
Yeah, I think I would echo some of what Patricia and Sae shared about, not having to apologize for time spent not working, whether that was an intentional choice or an unintentional choice, just something you had to deal with. I think just being straightforward, and where you can talk about a purpose that to that time and lessons learned, that's great. And it might be career related, right? It might be that your travels informed you about design, but it might not be. It might be you're caring for a baby or a parent, and that helped you grow in a different sort of way. It's fine to share that as well. There was something else I was going to say that I'm forgetting, I think, but I think just be straightforward. It's if you were having trouble finding a job, it's not something to again be concerned about. I would say sometimes the most inspiring stories I heard from people are the volunteer work they did, or participating in BosNOMA or other organizations like that. Things you're engaged in even when you're not working, to build that next opportunity. It's great to hear about those things.
Great.
I'm going to piggyback on what Whitney said earlier, about communicating, what you want in your career to your project manager, supervisor, or your office, right? Again, I'm always sort of, there's the ideal world, but there's also the pragmatic. Yes, I agree. Speak up and communicate, but at the same time, be reasonable, right? You can't say like, I want, a raise, a 50% raise, right? That's not being reasonable. You can't say that, I don't want to come to the office when everybody's coming into the office, and, because unless you have a very compelling reason, right? So I think I would just add a layer to that. Communicate and speak up, which I think is the critical, important aspect, but always know that you should be reasonable in terms of what you're asking for.
Absolutely. Great perspectives. Yeah, regarding career breaks, I just met a colleague who was a rock star of a very popular music group for like 10 years and then joined architecture. So very interesting how you're influenced that way. So I guess, Eunice, that we are very close to 7 p.m.